and go ahead. You have 90 seconds for your opening statement.
First of all, I really want to say that I'm truly sorry about the losses of lives that we have in Pennsylvania. My brother, who is a retired U.S. Army, he lives in Germany. My nieces and nephew, they are half Nigerian thing for all of us. My name is Folasade Adeluola. I am running because I am an activist, and I'm not really a politician. I enjoy being an activist because I have my freedom. I'm not beholden to anyone or any party. If I like you, if you do something, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, I'll applaud you. And when I don't like what you do, I'll go after anyone, whether you are the president of the United States or whomever you are. So I'm really glad to have this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next up, we have Russell Beste, Russell Beste, that is an independent from Burlington.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Bestie, like I'm your bestie. My name is Russell Beste. I'm running as for U.S. Senate. I'm running as an independent because I believe very much on fighting for issues, not sides. I think one of the biggest problems we have today is people pick a side and then it ends all conversations. So I really focus on issues all the time. I'm also self-funded. I haven't accepted a dime from anybody, so everything's right out of my own pocket. I'm up to about $1,500 right now. And you don't really need to spend a lot of money, I don't feel, in elections. I mean, everything's free. The internet's free, Facebook's free, YouTube's free. I'm using all these, LinkedIn's free. I'm using all these free services, putting my name out there, and then no one can buy my vote. I'm free, and I only work for you, the individual voter, because no one's giving me money, so I owe no favors. I'm dad to 3 kids. I live in Burlington. I work in the biotechnology field for about, 30-some years or so. A recognized world leader in that industry, very active in that. I work up in St. Albans right now. I've been there for 14 years working, so quite a while. I'm also working very hard to bring jobs to Vermont, and that's one of the reasons I'm running, actually, is because I've watched so many kids. I've coached a lot of teams, basketball teams, all these different sports, Cub Scouts, and everyone's leaving. They're not coming back, and that's wrong. We've got Vermont. It's the prettiest place in the world. We don't need to pay people to come here, create jobs, and I mean well-paying, clean jobs, and we'll all be able to live much more happily, and for generations to come, we can build the Vermont we used to have and can have again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Busa, an independent from Reedsboro.
Thank you all. Thanks for having us. And my motto is, hey, can't we just get along? You know, I'm not you, you're not me. I do things you probably don't do, and you probably do a few things I don't do, but we're neighbors, and we ought to be able to get along. And that's what the Vermont I come to a custom of is like. And I found that in the United States Constitution. It's called to ensure the domestic tranquility. And really, all I see coming out of Washington these days is to stir the domestic turmoil. And that includes even our own senator that's representing us down there, looking for a revolution. We had a revolution 242 years ago in this country. And what we got now is the United States Constitution, which tells me what I can do, a Bill of Rights, which tells me what I got to keep my hands off of, and a Declaration of Independence that tells me why, because those rights are endowed to us by our Creator, and that's not me. So, the reason for government is to protect those rights, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to order a more perfect union. So to do things in Washington that will bring us together instead of dividing us. To establish justice. We got to be honest, we see injustices occurring in our country. Well, I'd be willing to work on that. What's that mean?
Means you're almost up. One more sentence.
Okay. Beside the rest of the beginning of our Constitution, the other thing I want to do is avoid a civil war. I do believe we're heading that way if we don't straighten things out, and the Constitution is how I would remedy that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Edward Gilbert, an independent from Barrytown.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up and having us this evening. My name is Edward Gilbert. I'm a native-born Vermonter from Barrytown Elementary School, a graduate of Spalding High School. And like many, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do after after high school, so I went off into the U.S. Naval Submarine Service. I served on 2 fast attack nuclear submarines. I was U.S. Navy diver. I came back to Vermont, put myself through UVM. I was recruited to Fidelity Investments, where we designed the Roth IRA Evaluator. We broke a company record generating over $200 billion under a year. After leaving Fidelity, I went to another small startup company in Burlington, Mass. Called Genetic Microsystems, where we designed DNA microarray technologies. We were bought up by Affymetrix. That little technology has certainly impacted many industries across the medical fields as well as agribusiness. And I went back into the U.S. Army, 3rd and 124th Iowa Battalion after 9/11 in order to teach counterterrorism at Norwich University in Building 2001. I'm presently starting or attempting to start a high-tech business model myself here in this little state because I would love to, like Russell said, one job, good benefits, employing Vermonters, designing leading-edge technology. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was not sufficiently clear at the start, but when I raise my hand, that means
I
you've got
apologize.
10, no, you're fine. You've got 10 seconds remaining when I raise my hand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And next up, we've got Brad Peacock, an independent from Shaftesbury.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Wow, I'm quite a bit nervous, but this is my first foray into politics. A little nerve-wracking sitting next to Senator Sanders here, but the reason why I got into this was I didn't see a lot of people like myself, a lot of working class people who represent us. You know, I'm a farmer. I'm lucky if I make about $32,000 this year. And it's a great life. I love it. But I'm not sure that I can make it happen for much longer. Health insurance is going crazy. Our deductible is just insane. I have to have thousands of dollars in the bank. I already have thousands of dollars in student loan debt, thousands of dollars in medical bills because I had a chronic sinus infection and had to go to the hospital. It worries me. It worries me for the people of this state. I was born and raised here. I love it here. And I'd love to stay. I'm the only one of 4 kids that has been able to stay. And I'm looking to make it a little bit more affordable.
Thank you. Next up, we have Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent from Burlington.
Thank you. And let me thank Channel 17 for sponsoring this event, everybody for being here, and all of these fellow Vermonters who are up here making their points public. I want to thank many of the organizations in the state of Vermont, the AFL-CIO and virtually all of the trade unions for their support. I want to thank Planned Parenthood for their support and can hope to continue working with them to protect women's rights. I want to thank the Sierra Club for their support because there is no issue to my mind globally more important than protecting our planet from climate change. Brad and others have raised some of the important issues that we're working on. And I am very proud to be a leader in the United States Senate in saying that health care is a right, not a privilege. And my legislation, which calls for Medicare for all, now has the support of a significant majority of the American people and more people in Congress. I introduced legislation which said essentially that in America, if somebody works 40 hours a week, that person should not be living in poverty, and that we have to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, which in my view is $15 an hour. And that also means that we have to end the absurdity of women earning 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. We've also been very active in education, in the fight to make public colleges and universities tuition-free, and to demand that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we've got John Svitavsky, an independent from Bridport.
Good evening. Thank you also for doing this, and appreciate Channel 17. I've been a social worker for over 40 years. I was the founder of the Burlington Emergency Shelter back in 1982. We successfully helped 80% of those who came to us on their feet with an average length of stay of less than 3 weeks. Use the Burlington shelter as a model to start shelters in St. Albans, Barry, Camden, Maine, and another shelter, the Good Neighbor, downtown Burlington for long-term hardcore addicts. I've never run for office before. The events of the last few years have motivated me to get involved. I've been a Democrat and an activist for over 50 years. The issues of homelessness and opiate addiction are very important to me. My son wrestled with a heroin addiction for 13 years. I'm pleased to say that he's been clean for a year and a half. There are many issues that are very important to me. Climate change is one of them. Women's rights are very important. The agriculture, farmers in this state are held to one standard while towns are held to another. A farmer can lose his permit to operate while a town, when it rains, dumps a ton of wastewater into the lake, and that needs to be rectified. Looking to help create more housing for the disabled, and healthcare is very important. I'm a big fan of Obamacare. I would vote for impeachment. Listen to well, the House would vote, but I would say that there's no doubt that they need that, and I would be very interested in that trial. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, we have the only member of a political party here tonight, Mr. Lawrence Zupan, a Republican from Manchester. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to Channel 17 and for my colleagues up here on the stage. My name is Lawrence Zupan. I've been a student of economics, politics, and history since I was a child. My greatest education, though, has been after graduating from college and running a nonprofit educational organization, going back to school for my MBA, and opening several small businesses of my own. I've had the privilege of working with 3 different presidential offices, including Reagan, Bush, and Clinton. And it gave me much insight into the workings rather than his own personal and political presidential aspirations and desire to spread socialist ideas all around our great country. Secondly, I'm running to remind us of, reinforce, and reinvigorate the trod and true pathways to individual and societal greatness which have always made our country the envy of the whole world. And I wish to promote those ideas and this Vermont spirit of can-do independence which has formed the backbone of our state. We have many challenges. We're on the threshold of a golden era of Vermont Renaissance, and no doubt in these 2 hours I'll have a chance to tell you more about what I mean. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As Fola alluded to in her opening remarks, in the past week, this country has faced 2 horrific acts of terror, a shooting rampage at Pittsburgh synagogue that killed 11, and a bombing campaign that targeted a dozen Democrats and media organizations. While we may never truly understand what motivated the perpetrators to commit these acts, many Americans have linked them to a coarsening of the political rhetoric in the United States. So I'd like to start this forum by asking each of you to engage in an act of civility. In 30 seconds, please tell us one specific positive thing that you've learned about or already knew about one of your opponents in this race. So I'm going to go in the opposite order this time, so we'll start with Mr. Zupan. Any other candidates? Fair game. You've got 30 seconds to tell us something positive about them.
This gentleman seated right to my left has dedicated his life to helping people. It's touched my heart to see that, and it's wonderful what he's done. I also have something positive to say about Senator Sanders. I believe he has a noble impulse when he considers the needs of Vermonters and Americans, when he considers their health care needs, their educational needs, and their economic needs. Where I differ, though,
why don't we leave it? We'll leave it with the positive for now. We'll get back to that later
You'll
on.
hear more about that
Thank
later.
you. Mr. Svitavsky, go ahead.
I want to say a couple things. One about Brad. Really enjoyed listening to him at a forum in Wyndham. He shared from his life and very sincere. And he's been through a lot, and he's fighting to make. And I want to say to my friend on the end how kind she was when I bumped into her at the Secretary of State's office when we were filing our petitions, and we have a deep admiration for Hillary Clinton in common, and are both liberal Democrats at heart.
Senator Sanders?
Well, being up here, listening to what people are saying should make everybody here very proud to be a Vermonter. People who are serious people, who want to improve life in this country, in this state, and we have heard people who work tirelessly to improve lives, whether it's a homeless shelter, whether it's an organic farm, or it's people starting jobs. So as I look from left to right here, I think this is an evening that we should take a bit of pride in.
Thank you. Mr. Peacock?
I had the privilege of meeting Bruce. We met up one night, and I thought, well, we don't have much in common, but, you know, I'll go and talk, and then all of a sudden it was dark. So we had a great conversation, and I really, really appreciate meeting and talking in person. It's face-to-face communication it's the reconnection that we need in this country.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Gilbert?
Yes, it was a pleasure meeting all of the 8 candidates that showed up this evening. I had the opportunity to finally meet Brad face-to-face, Bruce Busa, Russell. I met,
Folasade.
thank you, Folasade. That one is a tongue twister, and I apologize again. I met her at an independent living seniors meeting. Of course, I know Senator Bernie Sanders rather well. I don't know if he even remembers me back when I first met him in '92, but we're going to oppose when it comes to socialism, Bernie. That's one thing.
Well, let's again leave it at that. Let's keep it positive for the
meeting Lawrence Zupan, and this was the first time I've had the opportunity to meet Juan, so it's a pleasure meeting you.
All right, Mr. Busa, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to agree with what Brad said. We had a good meeting that day, and I think the reason we got together was we were both concerned about the loss of being able to debate each other and still walk away neighbors and friends and being able to communicate. And we were both concerned about the loss of the ability to communicate between people. And that's basically why we got together, so we could see that we had different views of things, but we were still neighbors. And we were still Vermonters, and that we could still go on and be friendly with each other and actually become friends. So that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Best?
I'd like to thank Senator Sanders, of course, because he's really paved the way for a lot of us Vermonters many years ago and making a difference. I appreciate that. And Mr. Busa next to me, we don't agree on everything, but we do believe in the Constitution, and I love our Constitution and the fact that you can amend your Constitution, too, by 2/3 majorities. So there's a lot of opportunities there. Thank you very much.
Ms. Adeluola?
I'm really thankful to be on the stage, and I want everybody to know that I really respect Senator Bernie Sanders. We share the same birthday. I supported him in 2012, and I really do respect everyone on this stage. We are fighting the same fight to work and serve this nation. And I'm truly thankful to all the Vermonters whom, without knowing me, listening to my funny accent, voted for me in the primary. From my heart, I'm truly very grateful.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to stick with this topic for just another couple of minutes here. This is actually a question from an audience member. What is the cause of this renewed surge in political violence, and what role do our political leaders play, and what responsibility do they have for these terrible events? For this question, I'm going to give you each 60 seconds. And why don't we start with Mr. Peacock, and then we'll move this way and then back around. Okay, so go ahead, Mr. Peacock.
So as I understand it, what role do politicians have in this?
Yeah, I'll read the question one more time. What's the cause of this renewed surge in political violence, and what role do our political leaders play? What responsibility do they have for these terrible events? And yeah, go ahead.
It's the extreme divisive rhetoric that's coming from both sides, really, from many different sides. Part of why I ran is because this erosion of respect and decency, and that is from the top down. So the most sacred office in our land of the President of the United States constantly tweeting and demeaning people and dehumanizing people is aberrant, and it needs to stop. but it needs to stop on both sides. So, you know, you can't say, well, we're just going to fight fire with fire. No. Someone needs to stand up and say enough.
Thank you. Senator Sanders?
Thank you. This is a very important question. And I think we start off with the fact that today we have a whole lot of people in this country who are suffering with mental illness. We have 100 million plus guns floating around. And what we have seen in years past, before Trump, are terrible, terrible shootings of people walking into schools and mowing down children. Unbelievable. But I do have to say that today we have a president who is inflaming an already bad situation. When you have a president who goes to Montana and says to a politician, hey, you are my guy because you body slammed somebody in the media. When you have a president who calls the media, mainstream media, enemies of the people, and in his rallies, when people are threatening, I mean literally almost physically threatening members of the media, when you have a president who, when he was running for office, says, hey, I'm going to pay your legal bills if you beat up a protester. What that simply does is make a very bad situation worse. And many of these, impulses are now coming out.
Thank you. Mr. Svitavsky?
That was a very good answer, and I concur with Bernie on a lot of that. The cause of political violence, there's a great divide in our country, tremendous divide between the Democrats and the Republicans in our country, and it gets accented by President Trump's continuous attacks, his dishonesties. There's been a 57% increase in hate crimes in the last 2 years since President Trump came into office. And he kind of continually gives winks to everyone from white nationalists to those who hate. And he looks to stir up this attitude of violence and terrible feelings towards each other. And I think that Trump is very, very responsible for a good portion of the political violence that's happening in our country today.
Thank you. Mr. Zupan, go ahead.
Well, I think it's incumbent upon anyone who's going to seek public office or is already in public office to not be a polarizer, but to be a unifier. Unfortunately, Senator Sanders could go on for a long time about Donald Trump, but he himself has been the most polarizing figure on the national profile for longer than Donald Trump has been in office. So if I'm elected, and if I have the privilege of representing the people of Vermont in the Senate, I would seek to be an example of unifying by ideas and solutions, because after all, why is somebody sent to the Senate to represent the people of Vermont? To find the best solutions for the biggest problems. And I will look for those solutions, whether they come from a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. In fact, I try to put blinders on and not even look where those ideas came from. So I think it starts with the individual politician.
Fola?
I think violence and guns doesn't mix together. And especially when we have so many people with mental illnesses, and politicians, they only play politics. They cater to whomever is funding their campaign. I think I actually applaud the governor of Vermont, even though I am a down-to-the-earth liberal who is running as independent. I am a Democrat. However, on my social network, I've shared what the government has done, or Governor Phil Scott of Vermont, who on April 11, when passes the gun legislation in 4 ways. That is a good start. If I'm able to do what he has done, that is what I will do as your congresswoman or your U.S. senator. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Beste?
Thank you. A cornerstone of my campaign has been to focus on issues, not sides. I really think we all need to do that. Issues. Don't pick a side. No two people agree, you know. I mean, even your best friends, you don't agree on everything. So in that way, think of that, and that will help us to unite. Also, we need to remember the internet and cell phones and all this are relatively new, and all of a sudden, Fox News and CNBC and all these other stations, every second they have film bits of some bad behavior. That didn't used to be the case. So we need to kind of take a step back and realize we can't think, oh my God, the whole world's falling apart, you know, because then you jump into that forward and think, oh gosh, those liberals are bad, those conservatives are bad, and it's not really the case. It's somewhere in between. So just remember that. And I'm a uniter, and I've always been. I've got 3 kids, so I'm used to that battle, you know. It's a challenge at times. But yeah, so we need to focus on uniting and focusing on issues, not sides.
Thank you. Mr. Busa?
Yeah, a more perfect union. Political violence, we do hear a lot from Washington calling for forms of violence, and people are taking the lead. You know, we need to be careful what we say, even because we try to get something out. People may take it the wrong way and go with it. And we just need to be cautious with that. And something else we need to be cautious with is acting on misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation out there. If we act on misinformation, we're going to make a mistake. We have to get to the root and find accurate information and act on that. We may be wrong, we may be right, but at least we will not have been mistaken. So what's missing in the debate is the ability to listen. All we're doing is hollering at each other, and nobody wants to listen and search for the common ground. Maybe there's some places we ought not to go on both sides, but there's some common ground where we can agree on and start to build a relationship instead of tearing it all down. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert?
Yes, to comment on that, it's definitely on both sides, and that's part of the reason why I ran as an independent. I am more of a fiscal conservative. I do lean more to the right. I must admit, having an opportunity to meet Elizaveta Borisova and Kai Schaefer, they're 2 observers, one from Frankfurt, Germany, the other from just outside of Moscow, to observe our process and our democracy here in Vermont. Everybody should be very proud of the fact that you do have the right of freedom of expression without the threat of kicking someone low or Antifa sending threatening letters to Desiree Marin. I think it's extremely immature, it's unprofessional, and as a U.S. Senator, to deflect blame either way, I think there's some adults that definitely need to grow up all the way around.
Thank you very much. I have a quick follow-up question directed to Senator Sanders. Earlier today at a Vermont Public Radio, Vermont PBS debate, Mr. Zupan here said, these are my thoughts, and you responded by saying, they're pretty pathetic thoughts. I'm wondering if you consider that sort of a remark civil, and you have 30 seconds to respond to that.
Well, Mr. Zupan suggested that my economic philosophy was that of North Korea, which is a communist authoritarian dictatorship responsible for the death of millions of people in that country. He also suggested that my views on economics are those of Venezuela. Needless to say, those are wildly inaccurate. So maybe you should ask Mr. Zupan whether it is appropriate to make statements that are so outrageously inaccurate.
Well, sure. Mr. Zupan.
Oh, I'd be very happy to answer it. And actually, I was talking about the collectivization and the ownership and the direction of the whole economy, which is common to every socialist country. Obviously, North Korea is an extreme totalitarian dictatorship which doesn't resemble, doesn't resemble Venezuela as much, but the result, of course, is very similar in terms of the economic deprivation of its citizens. So separating the political issue from the economic issue, totalitarian collectivization of profit where the government decides that it owns either the profits or the means of production is socialism. The end result is always the same. So I think, Senator Sanders might want to consider whether his choice of words of pathetic was well advised or not, because the
Let's wrap it up there.
Venezuelan
Thank you.
model is what he wants to bring to our shores.
Thank you, Mr. Zupan. In the years since the New York Times and the New Yorker exposed Harvey Weinstein's alleged record of sexual misconduct, the Me Too movement has brought new awareness and understanding to this endemic problem. Yet Congress has taken no action to address it. What would you do in the U.S. Senate to combat sexual assault and harassment? And why don't we start with Mr. Gilbert? We'll move that way. And you'll each have 60 seconds to respond to this one, okay?
Start utilizing DNA technologies in the sense of I'm a little torn with this due to the fact that having volunteered at the sexual assault crisis team in Washington County in Vermont, these kind of displays of sexual assault, no one deserves a sexual assault, period, especially a woman. And I feel that it's being used as a political tool in these present times, and I feel that they should start teaching our children at a young age how to be young gentlemen and young ladies again, and being able to give mutual respect. And I think that is something that has been lost in this recent present time. And rather than tossing mud and accusations, start utilizing DNA technologies in order to actually find out who's telling the truth and who is making up some new story.
Mr. Busa?
Yeah, seeking the truth is really part of the whole thing. And to be in that position, when we bring forth truth, you know, our accused has the right to face the accuser. And it goes through some rough times. And what we see is a lot of times there's retribution, which is where we need to be free from, the threat of retribution. And to bring it forth and speak the truth and just get it out there without the fear of retribution is one of the main things. But there's much more to this subject than what we're going to do in 90 seconds. But that's one of the things. And that's all I got to say at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Beste?
Thank you. Well, I have two daughters who are in middle school and college, so very near and dear to my heart in this regard. I think about this all the time. I'm fortunate to live in Burlington, at the Burlington School District, and they've really gone out of their way to help educate the young kids from elementary school all the way up about respect and boundaries. And it's been very successful, I have to say. So it starts with the young ones at the school. And then beyond that, laws. We need to be tough with our laws and fair. And the third part is sometimes our laws are great, but they languish for years and years before penalties given. And I think we need to find ways to speed up our legal process so that there's real cause and effect. I did this, well, guess what? 6 months, 9 months, a year later, you're facing that consequence. Thank you.
Fola?
I think our world is changing in so many ways, and the Me Too movement, it's a positive thing and awareness to teach even our young folks what to say, what to do, how not to cross the boundary. So I think it's a good movement. But we should still love each other, care about one another, and try to be a very accommodating nation. So I think it's not a bad idea.
Thank you. Mr. Zupan?
This is not a problem that's going to be fixed overnight, because it's not a problem that's come upon us overnight. The problem of sexual harassment, which is a lack of respect for another person's basic human rights to have themselves not assaulted, that has descended upon our civilization over decades and generations. And the fix is one that starts under the roof of the homes of Americans, where there's a father and a mother in the house who teach their children love, respect, how to protect themselves, and how to treat each other. Unfortunately, there have been many movements in this country that have tended to talk down the basic infrastructure of family, which is the very building block of American or any good civilization. And what we need to do is we need to have a dialogue and a discourse that promotes, celebrates, reinforces the basic institution called the American family.
Thank
And I'll
you.
tell you.
Thank you, Mr.
Let me
Zupan.
just finish that sentence. I'll tell you that over a period of a few years, you will see this harassment start to change in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Zupan. If I could ask you to respect the time limits, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Mr. Svitavsky, go ahead.
As far as the Me Too movement, I just have to say it's about time. It's about time. I've always recognized that, unfortunately, a majority of men seem to have a lack of respect for women, and I didn't realize how pervasive, how absolutely pervasive it's become in our culture and how far it's gone, from Weinstein to some of the anchors that we've seen to some of the celebrities. It's Bill Cosby. It's heartbreaking, and to me, it's hard to understand, because each person's worthy of respect, and the entitled attitude that many men have is absolutely terrible. It's difficult to make progress when we've just placed a man on the Supreme Court who's credibly accused of sexual assault, and our president mocked the accuser. Our president has mocked the accuser and supported other candidates also that have been involved in sexual assault. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Sanders, in your answer, if you wouldn't mind also just letting us know if there's any legislation you have sponsored since the time. Thank you.
Well, sexual assault, as everybody knows, is kind of at an epidemic level in this country. About 25% of women indicate that at one point or another in their lives they have been sexually assaulted. To answer your question, Paul, there is legislation in the Congress right now, for a start, to protect employees in the Congress, to make sure that when women have been assaulted, there is an impartial body for them to go to without fear to make their case. And that is something that I am very strongly supported. But I want to agree with Mr. Zupan, actually, and everybody else up here. At the end of the day, in my view, I would frame it as a cultural revolution, is that women may not be treated as second-class citizens. Women are worthy of absolute respect, and that we have got to educate our young boys about a proper attitude toward women, that bullying is not acceptable, sexism is not acceptable.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Peacock?
So I'd just like to point out that it doesn't have to be a mother and a father. It can be two fathers, two mothers that can teach their children right and wrong. So that being said, I think there's a lot of hyper masculinity in this country, and it is a direct relation to Hollywood. And we really need to think about that. But we need to get to family values, and it's absolutely true at the home, and it's lead by example. So how do you treat women? How do you treat your mother? How do you treat your sisters? So it's really about leading by example. Thank you.
Thank you. This next question is pretty straightforward, so you can answer it as a yes or no if you would like. If you need to elaborate a tiny bit, that's acceptable, but try to keep it under 30 seconds. You all are running for a 6-year term in the U.S. Senate. Can you pledge tonight that if elected, you will serve all 6 years and you will not run for another public office that would keep you from finishing your term? And why don't we start with Senator Sanders, then we'll move this way and back.
I thought we would talk to the other candidates who ran for president as well. But, all right.
There's only one of those, Bernie.
I don't know if you know this, Paul, but I did run for president of the United States.
Yeah.
That's right.
And right now, my focus is on the year 2018. But if you're asking me to make an absolute pledge as to whether I'll be running for president or not, I'm not going to make that pledge. I have not made, simple truth is, I have not made that decision. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I may not run. I may. But on the other hand, I may not.
The question was, since you're running for a 6-year term,
I know what the question was.
Will you serve out your 6-year term if elected?
If I'm elected president of the United States, probably impossible to be a senator and a president at the same time. So the answer to that question is probably no. but I haven't made that decision as to whether I'll run.
Okay, so the answer is no, you're not committing to serving out your 6-year term tonight.
The answer is I have not yet made a decision as to whether I will be running for president. If I run and win, the likelihood is I will not be Vermont senator.
Okay, I think I got it now. Mr. Svitavsky, will you pledge to serve out all 6 years if you're elected?
Yes, I will serve all 6 years if elected.
Okay.
I will not be running for president in 2020 or any time in the future.
You're all welcome to answer that second question, but you don't have to. I don't want you to put you all on the spot there. Mr. Zupan?
Yes, I will gladly and proudly serve all 6 years, and I will fully answer that question now. And I will add that it's pretty evident that Senator Sanders is laying the groundwork for a run, which will probably come into full thrust on November 7th. So I think the people have a right to demand to know from him, if they elect him on November 6th, is he going to serve for the full 6 years? And he has clearly skirted the question. Thank you.
All right. Fola, go ahead.
I know everybody knows I was born in Nigeria. So I am not eligible to run for the President of the United States. I will be serving my full term.
Well, we appreciate you respecting the Constitution.
Thank you.
Mr. Beste, go ahead.
Well, actually, I was so frustrated with the candidates in 2016, I wrote my name in. So technically, I've run for president, Senator Sanders. Didn't win. Anyway, yes, I would absolutely pledge. I really want this job. I have a lot of energy, and I would love it if you all voted for me, U.S. Senate. Thank you.
Mr. Busa, 6 years?
My goal is to serve 6 years. If I don't make it for some reason, please investigate what I was looking into. I'm serious. I'm serious about that.
All right.
And my last 2 years, I would plan on trying to raise up people in Vermont who would want to run and help them learn civics.
All right. Mr. Gilbert.
Yes, if I'm elected as a U.S. Senator, one of the first things I'm going to do is definitely go for term limits. And I believe Bernie Sanders, back when I first met him, ran on that platform before he became a U.S. Senator, before he decided to pursue his presidency run. Yes, you did, Vern. I was there. I may have been a lot younger, but term limits is definitely something I agree with. You do two terms as a U.S. Senator, and then if you want to run for president and you can earn the American trust and become the President of the United States, you have every right in the Constitution to pursue it.
Senator Sanders, do you want to respond to the term limits?
Actually, I've never supported term limits and don't support it right now because I think it's undemocratic. If people like the candidate who's in office, they have the right to vote for that candidate. If you don't, term limit is vote them out.
So how about getting someone younger with some youth and some energy for some new technologies?
That's me.
All right, let's keep it moving.
I appreciate that.
Let's keep it moving. Mr. Peacock, I think you're the only one left to answer the question. 6 years or no?
Absolutely. It'd be an honor to serve Vermont for 6 years.
Great, thank you. I've got one quick follow-up question related to this for any of the candidates who would not pledge to serving out all 6 years. So I think that's just you, Senator Sanders. It looks likely that Governor Phil Scott will win re-election next week. He's a Republican. Are you at all concerned that if you were not to win re-election, that he would be appointed? Or
If I may say so.
if you were to not serve out your term,
In all due respect,
that he would, do you mind if I finish my question, sir, and then I'll let you speak? Do you have any concerns that if he were to be governor, you were not to fill out your term, that he would appoint a Republican to the Senate?
In all due respect, I think it's a little bit presumptuous of you to determine who's going to become the next governor of the state of Vermont. All right, and I'm not quite so sure that Governor Scott, who I respect and like, will in fact win. But it's a little bit presumptuous for us to be making that assessment a week before an election.
Any concerns if he is the governor?
Let's worry about what happens on November 6th.
So you're telling us, Bernie, there's still a chance for us? We have a chance to...
Okay, moving along here. This is a question that was submitted by a member of the audience here. Where do you stand on common sense gun control, and why do you or don't you support Vermont's recent gun legislation? And if I could just add on to that question, would you support those same measures at the federal level, since you are running for a federal seat and not for a state seat? Why don't we start with Mr. Busa and then go that way? And you have, why don't we take 60 seconds for this one, if that's okay.
Wow, that's pretty quick. Since I'm running under the Constitution and Bill of Rights, I'm pretty well strapped. I'm a Second Amendment, pro Article 16 in Vermont. So where I go on things like school shootings is a root cause analysis as to why this is occurring. And what I've seen is the root is secular, humanistic, progressive socialism. And what does that progress to? It progresses to godless communism as the next step. And sucking the soul out of people in our universities and school system is what's really at the root cause of this, along with some other things. And if you don't believe me, you can read some of the Jack Sawyer's comments that he made. Along with this, we have a situation of pharmaceutical drugs and depression. The two don't mix. And that's one of the reasons I believe in pharmaceutical marijuana also. Go ahead.
Mr. Beste, and I just want to remind you to stick to the question as much as you can. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I support the Second Amendment. I also know that the Second Amendment was written in the 1700s, and there was no forethought of the kind of guns and weapons we have today. So at some point, whether it's today or tomorrow, guns will get faster and more stronger and more powerful, and more people will die in these instances. It'll just get worse. There has to be a limit at some point. Is it today? Was it 10 years ago? It has to happen soon. And so I do support the ban or reduction of assault rifles and stop shots.
Fola?
I think I really love the governor for what he has done, because what he has done, I try so hard as an activist to do right after Newtown, right before Christmas in 2013. I am an activist, and I love what the governor has done. I shared him so many times on Facebook, everywhere, and also too because I am a mother to a child with Down syndrome. I am an accountant and a licensed insurance agent. And it doesn't add up shooting people, taking them to the hospital, the entire family suffers. I am a people person, and it is one of the issues that I really would love to see done. I am also a gun owner. I am also a licensed gun owner. I signed up with the NRA. I support the Second Amendment, but the governor has really done what I wanted the last so many years. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Mr. Go ahead, Mr. Zupan.
You know, it's astounding that in the second most safe state in Vermont, that we want to start instituting the restrictions on American citizens to keep and bear arms. Last year, there were 3 only gun murders in the state. There was a year not too long ago where there was 0. Those numbers are the envy of every other state in the union. New York State, New York City, and Chicago, they have wonderful gun laws, a lot of restrictive gun laws, piling more on all the time, and they are the murder capitals of the United States. So what is the real motivation behind people who want to restrict the right to keep and bear arms? I don't know. You'd have to ask them. But it's certainly not going to make Vermonters safer. Now, as far as schools, when you start your car, you turn the ignition, you put it in gear, it gets up to 55 miles an hour. That takes several seconds. When you want to stop the car, you don't apply the brake to the engine. You apply it to the wheel, the most dynamic manifestation of movement. What am I talking about? You want to protect the students. You put people in the schools with guns to protect them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Svitavsky, go ahead.
I do support sensible gun legislation. I believe in the Second Amendment in that everybody certainly has a right to personal protection and to hunting weapons. But we have, comparatively to other countries, a phenomenal excess of gun violence in our country. You look at countries like Japan, where there were 12 murders last year, Norway, where it's in single digits. We have thousands upon thousands. And we need to close loopholes at gun shows. There needs to be a waiting period to cut down on crimes of passion. I believe assault rifles, AR-15s, there's no need for them hunting or protecting your family. I believe they should be banned. Senator Sanders has taken NRA money. He has voted against the Brady bill 5 times, and I think that
Let's wrap it up.
That's a difficult area for Senator Sanders.
Senator Sanders, if you want to take a couple extra seconds to respond to that in your answer, you can go ahead and do that.
Never took any NRA money. In fact, when I ran for re-election to the House, we had strong opposition from the gun lobby. Look, nobody in this room or in this country has a magical answer to the terrible gun violence that is taking place all over this country. And it's not just what happened in Pittsburgh the other day. It's happening almost every day in America. In my view, we do need, while we support the Second Amendment, sensible, common sense gun safety legislation. And by the way, not a radical idea. This is supported by the overwhelming majority of the American people, including gun owners. What does that mean? It means that we strengthen the background check. It means that we end the gun show loophole. It means that we end the straw man provision. And we, I would agree, stop the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask you a quick follow-up question because you did not respond to Mr. Svitavsky's point about voting against the Brady bill, which in fact you did do. You also said in after the July 2012 Aurora, Colorado shooting at a movie theater, you told the Addison County Independent that, quote, decisions about gun control should be made as close to home as possible at the state level. You obviously now support a number of federal gun laws. I'm wondering if you can explain your change of heart.
It's not a change of heart. I think I support very much what the state of Vermont has done and that legislation. But I think obviously you need action at the federal level as well. In terms of the Brady bill, I made a promise when I ran for office and won in 1990 that I would not support the Brady bill. And among other things, what has happened after the Brady bill is that we were able to get computerized background checks, which is a much more efficient and effective approach.
Mr. Peacock?
I'd ask you to repeat the question because I've kind of forgotten what it was, but
I've forgotten it too. I think the question was, did you support the gun control legislation that Governor Scott supported here in Vermont, and would you support similar measures at the federal level?
Okay. I'm a hunter, I'm a gun owner, I support the Second Amendment. Now, do I support the common sense gun laws? I think that I do. What I didn't support was how it was rushed through. I think every voice deserves to be heard. And that means holding a hearing for every piece of the legislation. They held a hearing for the universal background check, but they added in the clip limit and the age of 21 and maybe something else at the end without holding a public hearing. So those are things that I would like to see and hear from the general public about before I would make a decision, and especially before I would make a decision at the federal level. But I'm sure that there would be oversight in committee hearings about that. Now, I also do support the CDC, now that the Dickey Amendment is rescinded, comprehensive study on gun violence in this country.
Mr. Gilbert?
I've taken the oath far too many times to be anti-gun, to be honest with you. I remember Oslo, Norway. That was where a police officer or an individual impersonated a police officer and went on an easy killing spree. Now, I don't support the kind of school shootings that we're witnessing or the violence that we're seeing in the streets, and a lot of it is because of the rhetoric. And being a former service member of 2 military branches, I can't. I have used just about every weapon in the Army, with the exception of the opportunity to shoot a few tanks. Having the opportunity to serve on 2 fast attack nuclear submarines, whether it was a Tomahawk cruise missile or a Mark 48 torpedo, I'm sorry. I've proven under stress and everything else that if you're properly trained, you can properly save and help people with the Second Amendment.
Okay, thank you. This is a question from a viewer at home that we received before the debate. Under Article 1, Section 3 of the United States Constitution, the Senate is responsible for trying all impeachments. What is an impeachable offense, and has this President Trump committed an impeachable offense for which he should be tried and removed from office? And I'll start this time with Mr. Zupan. You all have 60 seconds to respond.
The answer to the second question is no. As far as what an impeachable offense is, we have to go to the Constitution to understand that. And it's high crimes and misdemeanors. And the bar for asserting a high crime and misdemeanor against the Chief Executive of the United States, duly elected, is deliberately very high, and it has to be established by a court that's called the House of Representatives, and then it has to be confirmed by a 2/3 majority of the Senate. The reason it's so high is because there's so much trust invested in the Chief Executive and President of the United States. So there's a lot of atmospherics and a lot of personality issues and a lot of self-expression that many different people could choose not to like about the President. But none of those things rise to even close to the level where one could plausibly assert grounds for impeachment.
Could you give me the wording of the question again?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, it's kind of a long one. Basically, can you define an impeachable offense, and do you believe that President Trump has committed one?
An impeachable offense would be treason, colluding with the enemy, and I believe that President Trump should go to trial. I think that there's enough evidence there. Well, of course, we're waiting on the Mueller report, which will enlighten us all. But
We're waiting for that
but
for
I
a
think
mighty long
that
time.
when we understand that the president directed Jared Kushner and Manafort and others to meet with Russian officials to get dirt on his presidential opponent, when he encouraged Russia to hack Hillary, and for God's sakes, once more, her emails, I think that President Trump has very likely committed things that if they're not treason, they're very close to it. And I'll look forward to that trial in the Senate to hear all the evidence. But I think that Mueller has a devastating case. And I think that President Trump most certainly was involved in shady tactics, and very curious to see him with President Putin.
Senator Sanders?
Well, I don't know what Mueller has because he's still doing it. There is an investigation going on right now as to whether or not Trump's campaign and Trump colluded with the Russians. If, in fact, it turns out that he did, that is an impeachable offense. If the president tries to impede that investigation by firing Mueller or in any other way, not allowing this investigation to go forward, that's called obstruction of justice, which I also think is an impeachable offense. But right now, that investigation is going on. I think Mueller is doing a serious job, and I think we can't answer that question until that investigation is completed.
Thank you. Mr. Peacock?
I believe obstruction of justice is an impeachable offense. I, like Senator Sanders, can't say. The Mueller investigation is still happening. However, I do not think the president is above the law. No one in this country is above the law. So I think that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, go ahead.
I definitely have to agree with Brad. When you expose SAP, national security information, even as running for Secretary of State, that used to be an offense that would send me off to prison if I exposed any of those secrets while I was serving in the fast acting submarine service. I think this is a tit for tat. It's in my view, it's a political class playing games with American taxpayers' money, and I completely feel it's a waste of time. He is our present president. Whether you like the way he uses Twitter or not, he's utilizing 21st century technology. I must admit, he is a New Yorker. I'm a Boston Red Sox fan. I've had some fun when it comes. We know how to cheer on our teams, and my dad's a Yankee. I'm a Red Sox, and he's converted my youngest son into a Yankee fan. So, I mean, I have to completely, I apologize, but yeah,
That's okay.
I think I can, you know where I stand on that one.
The way I understand it, the House of Representatives brings the impeachment to the Senate, and the Senate tries the case. And since I would be in the position of trying a case, I don't have an answer because I haven't seen the evidence right now, and I will keep an open mind both ways. I may have to rule one way or the other.
Mr. Beste?
Yes, certainly for an impeachable offense, treason, collaborating with the enemy, things of that nature would be, obviously, to me, impeachable. In regards to Mr. Trump, President Trump, I very much like his economy, and I like his matter-of-fact way of speaking and very open and candid with people. On the other hand, I am troubled by some of his activities, the way he relates to Vladimir Putin, and I still don't know what he did for those 2 hours alone. I also am concerned about his closeness to other parties, North Korea, et cetera. But all that said, there's a very, very high bar for impeachment. So until something's actually presented that would prove impeachment, I think I don't really know. I'm waiting for the Mueller investigation and any other information that comes out.
I think I'm just going to use this opportunity to talk to the Vermonters that I really do care about people. I lost my mother on my 14th birthday in Nigeria. She was having twins. And I've seen the same incident or so many things in this nation. I am for health care. I am for immigration reform. I am for gun control. I am for $15 minimum wage. And I love what Special Counsel Mueller is doing. I really technically have no say into what happens to the investigation until I become a U.S. Senator. And I would like to tell all the Vermonters to vote for me because I am a people person and I'm here for a change.
Thank you very much. As a U.S. Senator, your number one job is to vote in the U.S. Senate. In your first term in the Senate, Senator Sanders, you missed only 1.7% of the roll call votes that were held. That's very close to the average of your peers. But in your second term, that was not the case. In 2016, you missed nearly 71% of the roll call votes. That was 115 out of 163 votes that were held that calendar year. Can each of you pledge tonight that you will miss no more than 5% of the roll call votes during your term? We start again, Sanders, and we'll go this way. And you've got 60 seconds to respond.
Okay, well, I think maybe you didn't hear me the first time. I ran for president of the United States.
Yep.
And when you run for president of the United States, you actually go around the country. And you have to campaign in order to do that. And I am very proud that here in Vermont on the primary election night, we received 86% of the vote. That's the highest percentage of any candidate in the campaign. But the bottom line is you're asking me the same question as you asked me before. I returned, by the way, while I did miss many votes, on most of those votes were kind of lopsided votes, but on key votes where my vote was needed, I did come back to Washington. So you're asking me once again, will I be running for president of the United States? If somebody, any of these ladies and gentlemen, run for president of the United States, they're going to miss some votes. If I run for president of the United States, I will also miss votes.
With all due respect, sir, I am aware that you ran for president in 2016. I am also aware that you ran for U.S. Senate in 2012, and I'm also aware that you're running for U.S. Senate in 2018. Good. So the specific question was whether you would commit to missing no more than 5% of the votes, and it sounds like your answer is no, you're unwilling to commit to that.
If somebody runs for,
I'm asking you
no,
whether,
it is the same
I'm asking
question.
You whether you're
it is, if you run for president, I would
Senate.
suggest that you check and see when people run for president who are in the Senate, if they miss votes. And the answer is they do.
That's correct. And we'll move on just a second, but for the record, I do want to mention that there were several other U.S. senators who ran for president in 2016. You missed more votes than any of the others running for
I'm not
president
so sure
year.
that that is
That is
accurate.
actually, in fact, the case. It's also true
It is
that
accurate.
you missed more votes than many of the candidates who ran in 2008, 2012. Mr. Svitavsky, will you commit to missing no more than 5% of the votes if you're elected to the
I will
Senate?
absolutely commit to not missing more than 5% of the votes. I won't miss that many, and neither will I be condescending, arrogant, or insolent about it.
Thank you. Mr. Zupan.
Thank you. I will absolutely pledge to not miss 5% of the votes. In fact, I will pledge that I will crawl over broken glass in my shorts to vote. Okay.
Well, we don't want to go that far.
Furthermore, I think it's astounding that Senator Sanders is being allowed to dodge the question of whether he would accept a re-election to do a job that he will not pledge to fulfill.
He's running for
That is
president.
astounding. And
Just
I
made that
think the
announcement.
voters of Vermont in this room ought to take notice of his answer that he will not commit to being president to do his job.
Senator Sanders, do you want to respond to that, or do you want to move on?
As a United States Senator in Vermont, I am leading the effort successfully to move this country to health care for all, leading the effort successfully to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, leading the effort successfully to make sure that public colleges and universities are tuition-free, moving forward successfully not to give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%, but to demand that the wealthy and large corporations start paying their fair share of taxes. That's the record that I've established over the last 6 years.
Thank you to the audience members for your enthusiasm. Fola, go ahead.
I am a licensed insurance agent. And when I was an agent, I didn't care to make commission off of my policyholders. And I really do like politicians telling us the truth, because it is impossible to have or to legislate Medicare for all. Hear me out. It is impossible in the U.S. Congress to have Medicare for all, because this will take me about 3 hours, but I'm going to cut it short.
Well, I apologize. I'm going to actually just interrupt you because the question was whether you'd commit to voting to not missing more than 5% of the votes
Yes.
if you're elected to the Senate.
I guess I'm the only one on this stage who cannot run to become the President of the United States. So if given the opportunity, I will fulfill. You will have my 100% vote. There's no reason to miss 5% or 2% or 1%.
Okay, thank you.
You will have my full commitment.
Thank you. Mr. Beste?
Well, my friends will all tell you that I'm about records and working hard. So not only will I go under the 5%, my goal will be to set the record, the best attendance ever in the U.S. Senate. So that's what I'll do. Thank you. Oh, and then I'd also like to get the applause someday that Bernie gets. That would be a good record.
Anyone? Anyone out there? All right. Mr. Busa, go ahead.
So my past record work history, I've been very dedicated to my job. As far as being present for 5%, I cannot say that for sure. I did hear Bernie say one thing, that his vote wouldn't have changed anything, but as long as my voice was heard, if there was another pressing issue that I needed more information on, I would go and get it if the circumstance led me free to go do that. And without knowing circumstances that may arise, this thing that's going on in the border is one thing. I would want to go down there. And if what I was going to vote on is going to pass, or my vote wouldn't matter, I would take the opportunity to go to the site and see what was going on, so I could act on truth.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Gilbert?
Making it 5% is, I think it's pretty easy. I was bottled up in a submarine for 333 days out of a year. We were there 24/7. So I would, and being as motivated as I am to pursue term limits, I would try to make every single vote, unless there is some medical emergency within my family. And even then, I'll find a way to cast it one way or another.
Thank you. Mr. Peacock?
So much to my husband's chagrin, I told him last night that I was going to run for president, but then he told me that I'm too young. So I cannot run for president. And I actually already knew that. But you know, due to some life-altering event, of course, I would absolutely be under 5%.
Okay, great. We're going to move on to questions, or one question. Each of you can pose one question to one other candidate. If you could please try to keep your questions to the question form, not the statement form, I'd appreciate it. And responses can be up to 60 seconds per person. Why don't we start with you, Mr. Svitavsky, and then we'll go around that way to Mr. Zupan next. So just name the person first, if you would, and then go ahead with your question, the person you're asking the question.
Senator Sanders, I'd like to ask you why there were over 600 pages of Federal Election Commission violations, and I'd like to know where your tax returns are and where the $10 million donation came from during your campaign.
So would I. You can help me with that 10 million, John, we'd be in great shape. That's nonsense. You know, I quite frankly don't know what you're talking about a $10 million donation. In fact, what we have done is not only help lead the effort against this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which allows billionaires to buy elections, but as it happens, my presidential campaign has opened up and I think began the process for candidates all over this country not to look at large corporations and wealthy individuals for their contributions. And what you are seeing today all over this country is people saying, as I said in 2016, no, we're not going to take corporate PACs. We're going to look at small individual contributions. And if you look at what's going on in this country today, that is the trend, and that is a very good thing.
Okay.
Can I have a follow-up?
Let's move on, if that's okay. Mr. Zupan, go ahead.
This is to Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders is fond of talking about his success in raising the notion of a $15 an hour minimum wage, as if that was going to solve the problems of America's lower-end workers. Actually, my idea is that I noticed that $15 an hour actually doesn't cut it, especially when workers are rejecting the increase because they would lose
If you could get
their
to the
existing,
question
here it is.
pretty soon. Thank you.
Because they would lose their existing benefits. So my question to Senator Sanders is, would you join me in supporting an end to the benefits cliff, which causes otherwise productive people to either stay home or give up jobs where the increase in their salary would make them ineligible for existing benefits?
2 points. Number one, yeah, you're right. $15 an hour minimum wage is not enough. But you know what? It's substantially better than $8 or $10 or $12 and can make a heck of a lot of difference in a working person's life. So I am very proud to have introduced the lead legislation, which now has 30 co-sponsors in the Senate, to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And I'm delighted to see that all over this country, that minimum wage is going up to $15 an hour. And I'm delighted and proud that Amazon, as a result of our efforts, has raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour. Now, if you're talking about, as I understand what you're saying, that there are instances where people get a wage increase, they lose food stamps, or they lose their child care benefits. If that's what you're referring to, you're right. That is absurd, and that is a disincentive to many people to go out and get decent paying jobs.
So would you join me in sponsoring?
Let's move on.
I don't have to join you. I've been there for years on that issue.
I'm asking
Thank you.
How
We're
come you
gonna-
haven't done it? How come you haven't done it?
Why don't you?
We're gonna move on. I imagine you might get some other questions from the other candidates, Senator.
I seem to be a popular guy here.
You do.
Well, you are running for president, Bernie.
Fola, can you? Yeah, go ahead. Question for whoever you'd like.
Senator Sanders, obviously, you are going to run in 2020. I saw you on the TV election night saying that you will be running. If you are you going to run again as a Democrat? Or are you going to run? I really do prefer you run as a Republican.
Senator Sanders.
Well, I think it's fair to say, Folasade, I will not be running as a Republican. I think that's fair to say. But let me just say this. I'm glad Johnny indicated that I got $10 million, and you heard me on television saying I was going to run. All of that is great news to me. I'm not aware of that. And here's the simple and honest truth. People can like it or not, agree or not. I have not made that decision.
Okay.
And right now, my focus is on getting elected to the United States Senate in 2018 and being the very best senator that I can be.
Can I do a follow-up?
No, we're going to keep moving along if that's okay.
Okay.
Mr. Beste, go ahead.
Yes, I'll keep the streak going to Senator Sanders. Hypothetically, if, say, Russell Beste were to win U.S. Senate in a week, what advice would you give to me?
Good question, Russell.
That'd be good.
What I have tried to do is, as a congressman in Vermont, before then a mayor in Burlington, and as the United States Senate, I think it is fair to say, no one knows for sure, I've held more town meetings in the state of Vermont, in every part of the state of Vermont, than probably any member of Congress in the history of the state of Vermont. And I think that would be my answer, that at the end of the day, you got to stay close to the people. And once you get to Washington, it is an incredible bubble, and you're surrounded by powerful lobbyists who want you to vote their way. And I think the best antidote to that is stay as close to the people as you can.
Thank you. Mr. Busa?
My question is to everyone in this room, but Senator Sanders, you may answer first. Our federal debt is 105% of our gross domestic product. My question is, have you contacted and had conversation with the Federal Reserve as to what gives our dollar its value and at what hyperinflation kick in?
No, I have not. My contact with the Federal Reserve was to demand an audit of the Fed after the Wall Street bailout to find out, in fact, how much money the Fed lent not only to corporations in this country, and not only to banks in this country, but to central banks all over the world. But your point is well taken in the sense that we have, I think now, about a $21 trillion national debt. And one of the many reasons I voted against Trump's huge tax break for the rich is it will drive up the debt by another $1.5 trillion. And one of the other areas, by the way, that is not talked about terribly much by Republicans or many Democrats is we have to take a hard look at a $700 billion defense budget and a defense department that is the only major agency that has yet to be audited. So your concern is legitimate, and it is an issue that we've got to address.
Can he answer to part of the question of what gives our dollar its value?
I think we're actually just going to move on if that's okay. Go ahead, Mr. Gilbert.
May I ask?
One person.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
As farmers, if I was elected as your U.S. Senator, what would you ask for me to help you become a more productive, more profitable farmer in the state of Vermont?
I think I would ask you to do something about healthcare and student loan debt.
Outstanding. Seeing how both of us are still battling with student loan debt, I agree with you 100%.
All right.
I'm glad you brought that up because I hope we get to discuss that here in a moment.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Peacock.
Mr. Zupan, do you support the Equality Act, and would you as a U.S. Senator?
The Equality Act is designed to express the fact that all people in the United States, all citizens, have the right to make all the choices that they want about their own lifestyle. I believe that people have the right to make their choices about lifestyle. Is there any other part of that act or question that I have not responded to that you would like to hear me say?
So that's a no?
Well, perhaps you ought to educate me further about the details of the Equality Act.
So the Equality Act
And let's
is-
just keep it very brief in the interest
Sure.
of time.
It's an extension of the 1964 Civil Rights Act for all LGBTQ people.
Which allows them to do what?
Not be discriminated for housing, not getting fired for being gay.
Right, I totally support people having equal rights so that they're not discriminated against for their choice of lifestyle, they're not discriminated against in jobs. I support that.
Senator Sanders, you've got a question to ask of one of your peers here?
Let me,
You can't ask yourself, Bernie.
Well, we didn't explicitly
No,
prohibit
I
that.
apologize. I just needed to get a little zinger in there.
a couple of weeks ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the 700-page report. And what they reported should scare the bejesus out of every person, not only in our country and in the world. And what they said is that climate change is very real. Climate change is created by human activity. Climate change is already causing devastating problems in this country and around the world. And here's what is most scary, is they said if we don't get our act together in the next 12 years and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, there will be irreparable harm to the planet we're leaving our kids and our grandchildren. Mr. Zupan, do you agree that climate change is real, that it is man-made, and that it is already causing irreparable harm, and that we need drastic action to deal with it?
Every time this subject comes up, it's preceded with an amount of fear-mongering that is then not addressed with any solutions. I'm going to come up with the solutions first and leave the fear-mongering to Senator Sanders, who has no solutions. He only wants to put somebody on the spot thinking he's going to earn brownie points with the voters. So here's what I have to say, and it's good news. You know, our governor has talked about having 35% renewable energy by 2050. I say that that's a very pale and wimpy objective, especially when the head of Google engineering, Ray Kurzweil, has stated that if the federal government only got out of the way of picking favorites in the renewable energy field, we could have 90 to 100% renewables in 12 years by 2030. So if I'm the U.S. Senator, I'm somebody who wants to have renewables, who wants to have the cleanest air, who wants to have people to give the choice of their energy. I will see that the innovation-stifling efforts of the federal government to pick and choose favorites is over, and that the renewables.
Okay, your time's up. I'm going to just interrupt you quickly. You didn't actually answer the question, which is whether you believe climate change is real, is largely caused by man. And what was the third part of your question, Senator?
It's already causing devastating problems.
Already causing devastating problems.
Senator Sanders can ask the question, and I can make my answer. My answer gave something more valuable than the curiosity as to what my internal beliefs are. My answer gave a solution to the problem he identified. That's my answer.
If I can briefly respond.
You know, actually, I will let you respond.
Why should
other candidates
I'm going to let you
Let's go to the
respond.
next question.
Guys, hold on one second.
Why should he respond?
Thank you, everybody. I was going to ask about this question. I'm glad Senator Sanders brought it up. I'd like to give each of you a chance to answer the question. So why don't we just start going back along this way, and I will repeat the question, and Senator Sanders, correct me if I get it wrong, but you asked whether climate change is real, whether it's man-made, and whether it's already causing devastating effects on this planet. So go ahead, Mr. Svitavsky.
Climate change is real. It is caused by man. You look at from the beginning of history to the Industrial Revolution, it is amazing what we have done in the past 150 years. And I believe, yes, the temperature of the oceans has already gone up over a degree. The storms that we get are tremendous. It's clear that with 99% of scientists agreeing, I believe it's very real, and it is caused by man.
Senator Sanders, would you like to answer your own question?
The issue is not, frankly, what Mr. Zupan, and by the way, what Mr. Zupan's response is what Republicans often say. They usually phrase it, I'm not a scientist, I don't know.
I didn't say I'm not.
That's not true at all, Bernie.
But the point is,
We've actually conducted
Listen, guys,
scientific research.
everybody,
Point
let's allow the senator to finish his answer. Everybody else, everyone, let's let the senator finish his.
as the moderator indicated, you didn't answer a very simple
But
question.
you're trying to put
Either
words in my
climate
mouth,
change-
Senator Sanders, and I won't accept it.
Mr.
You did
Zupan.
not answer the question.
I gave you
In
the
my view, climate change is very real. And if we love our children and our grandchildren, and if we want to leave them a planet that is healthy and habitable, we have got to stand up to the fossil fuel industry, have the guts to take them on, to tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet, and that we need to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And by the way, when we do that, we will not only save the planet, we'll lower energy costs and create millions of good-paying jobs.
Thank you.
I absolutely believe climate change is real. Whether it's man-made or not, I mean, I personally believe so, but I think we all get bogged down in that a little bit too much. It's real, so let's take care of it. As a farmer, I've been on the front lines of climate change for 13 years now. I've seen the erosion in our fields. I've seen the diseases and the pests go crazy. And it's getting harder and harder to farm organically. So that's going to be a major problem. That's my life. So my life is on the line, and so is a lot of farmers in this state and throughout this country and world.
Could you please rephrase the question?
Do you believe that climate change is real?
Yes.
Man-made?
I do believe it's real.
Okay.
I do not agree with it being totally man-made yet, but please complete it.
And whether it's already causing devastating harm to the planet?
It's definitely causing some issues, but I definitely do not feel that the state of Vermont, being the smallest footprint state, should be the one to pay carbon taxes. I mean, you've got number 1, Texas, number 2, California, number 3, Pennsylvania, and yet they're coming to our legislature, one of the poorest states, a rise in poverty since 2016, rather than giving us the funding so we can design these technologies, perfect them, and sell them locally, nationally, and internationally to China and India, the other major carbon polluters on the planet. I would, as a U.S. Senator, I would certainly lobby for that kind of funding to bring those jobs here in Vermont to create those technologies.
I believe we have been experiencing global warming since the Ice Age. I live on Glacier Till, and I think this building might also be built on Glacier Till. So we have been warming since the Ice Age, and we've been adapting. Now, what percent of man-made activity is causing it to warm up quicker? I don't know that percent. But I do know that the percent of man-made pollution is 100%. So in the areas of air, water, dirt, and food, we need to get straight on that. And as far as our young people, we need to encourage them to take on their entrepreneurship and develop new things. As far as the acid coming out of the stacks, we need to continue our development of the scrubbers and continue going forward in the solar panels. I mean, I don't like them on the organic fields, I'll tell you that much, but on housetops, barn tops, over parking lots, they make sense. And in Vermont, as it gets warmer, we're going to burn less heating fuel up here. So one dumb thing is changing our clocks back to a colder hour in the spring to burn more fuel. And the other thing, well,
I think we're straying a little bit here, so Mr. Beste, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. If you go to the beaches of the West Coast, the beaches over the last 40 years have shrank tremendously. Same on the East Coast. If you go to the mountains out west, you go to the mountains in New Zealand, you go to the mountains in Switzerland, the glaciers have disappeared. So you cannot argue, I don't think in any way, that the Earth is not warmed. That's also collected by NASA and others that shows the Earth is warm. Second, if you look at the carbon count published by NASA, it has spiked by 2 orders of magnitude, 100 times, just since the Industrial Revolution. So you can draw your own conclusions, but regardless of whether you believe the cause is that or some oscillation or whatever, the fact is the carbon count has gone up and the temperature's gone up. There's no arguing those 2 points. So
oceans don't heat up?
Let's
I'm not done.
let
Please
him
don't
finish
interrupt me.
with his
I
answer.
apologize.
Thank you. And so why would we not, for our own children and our grandchildren and the generations to come, do what we can to control the carbon count, since it sure as heck seems to be related? So yes, I would very much do what we could. Solar panels, there's all kinds of new technologies being developed. All those things we need to pursue.
Thank you. Fola?
I do support Senator Sanders on climate change. I was one of the activists who go after some people that they are climate change denial. I supported Vice President Al Gore one-on-one. And so we do believe in climate change, the ozone layer, the atmosphere condition, and we cannot, I support Senator Sanders too on the fossil fuel. I have signed something online regarding climate change. So I do support Senator Sanders.
Okay, thank you very much. A little bit earlier, Senator Sanders brought up the defense spending of our nation, and this brings up a question that was submitted ahead of the forum by a person out in the broader audience who wrote, I'd like to know if Senator Sanders' position on the F-35 has changed, and if not, why he still supports it despite being so vocal against military spending. The person, of course, is referring to the planned basing of F-35 fighter jets at the South Burlington Vermont National Guard headquarters. And I'd actually like to pose this to everybody, not just Senator Sanders. So why don't we actually start with Mr. Beste, and then we'll move this way. And so the question again is whether you support the basing of F-35s in South Burlington.
Yes, I do support the basing of F-35s in South Burlington. Whether we like it or not, we need protection in the United States, and it's incumbent upon all states to do their part. They happen to be based here in Vermont. I know a number of the National Guardsmen who fly there, and they're all very much in favor for it as well. You know, I mean, I don't really like it all the time hearing the noise and whatnot, but we owe it to our country to do just that. And nowadays, with these new hypersonic missiles that are being developed by some countries, including Russia, these things travel at 4,000 miles an hour. So we need to have protection. Additionally, we need to work harder to collaborate with other countries and start building bridges. We can't have this us versus them mentality, because someday someone's going to push a button and we'll all be in a whole heap of trouble.
Mr. Busa?
Yeah, I haven't actually heard an F-35 yet, but with all the technology, I would think there should be some way of eliminating the extreme noise from those things. And if they want to move them to another base, I don't have a problem with that. And we'll let the locals holler it out where it is, but it does need to be in the Northeast.
Okay. Mr. Gilbert?
Having had the responsibility of those kind of weapons, and also I am definitely a supporter of the F-35 for the Vermont Air National Guard. It's leading edge 21st century technology. My oldest son is in the U.S. Air Force. I want my children learning on the latest leading edge technology, and I would definitely bring it to the state of Vermont.
I oppose the F-35. All the towns that would be affected have opposed it, and you know, you're going against democracy. So I know Senator Sanders probably has a lot more info on why, and I'd love to see it at some point, but I do oppose it. The majority of Vermonters around here, around this area, that will be affected too.
And Senator, I'm just going to repeat the question because there's a second part that was directed specifically to you. I'd like to know if Senator Sanders' position on the F-35 has changed, and if not, why he still supports it despite being so vocal against military spending.
Okay. There are two separate issues there. I am one of the, I think, strongest opponents of a never-ending increasing military budget. We talked earlier about the national debt, but we have not talked about the fact that we now spend more on defense than the next 10 countries combined.
Yes.
And that the Department of Defense is the only agency of government not to have gone through a thorough audit. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is the F-35. And let us be very clear. The F-35 has been worked on for decades. The F-35 is here. The F-35 is the fighter plane of choice of NATO and the United States Air Force. So the real question, Mr. Heinz, is not whether we're going to have an F-35 or not, but whether it is located in Vermont or in South Carolina or perhaps in Florida. I happen to be a very strong supporter, I'm very proud of the Vermont National Guard. They do a great job. And I think the evidence is pretty clear. To answer Brad's question, if we don't get the F-35, I know people may disagree with me, but if we do not get the F-35 here, it will be a devastating blow to the Vermont National Guard. It will mean the loss of probably hundreds of jobs and an important part of our economy. So it's not whether you're for it or against it in a sense, it's here. It's whether it is in Vermont or whether it's in South Carolina. And I want to support the Vermont National Guard.
We found something to agree on, Bernie.
Mr. Svitavsky, go ahead.
And I'll agree there too. I also oppose the astronomical defense spending in our country, but the F-35 is going to come to be, and the question is where is the right location? And I think the people of South Burlington and the community needs to be heard and and be respected as they weigh in. But I think that the question is location, not whether or not we have the F-35.
National defense is the most legitimate constitutional role of the federal government. Accordingly, I wholeheartedly support the presence of the F-35 as a fighting vehicle, and I support its being here in Vermont. What I don't support is the snipping and snapping at the American defense budget, even though, like Medicare and Medicaid, there's an amazing amount of fraud, corruption, and waste that ought to be reduced. When Senator Sanders talks about us having a greater defense budget than the next 10 countries combined, I say that's wonderful, because we have 10 times as many enemies gunning for us as the next 10 countries combined. The primary responsibility above all responsibilities of the federal government is to defend and protect everybody sitting in this room and every one of the 326 million Americans, and I'm so thankful for it. Thank you.
We've got time for just a couple more questions here. There are a lot more topics, of course, I want to get to.
Hey,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
yes.
I apologize. Go ahead.
I disagree with Senator Sanders on F-35. I am from Georgia, and the base F-35 is built is few minutes from my house. Well, whenever the Republican takes office, they put more money, more into defense, but we are not fighting any war now. The F-35 was supposed to have cost about $500 million. It is now costing us. It was supposed to have been done in 2016. In order to continue the pattern, it hasn't been done. And just like one of my colleagues talked about the carbon monoxide, is bringing carbon to Vermont. So I am against the F-35. And not only that, as an accountant, it's the way to take money away from Social Security, from Medicare, from healthcare, by putting more money into defense. So that is why I do not agree with Senator Sanders on F-35.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to a topic that Mr. Peacock spoke eloquently about earlier on, which is the state of agriculture in Vermont. And you weren't speaking specifically about it. It is the case that dairy farms in Vermont and throughout the country are on life support. I'm wondering what you would do to support dairy farmers and Vermont agriculture in general in the U.S. Senate. Why don't we start with you, Mr. Peacock, and then we'll go towards Senator Sanders and back around that way. Okay, and let's, why don't we take 45 seconds on this one? I apologize, just so we can get through a couple more questions before the end of the debate. Go ahead.
Sure. I believe that we need to look to our neighbors to the north and look at their supply side system. There are other great ideas out there, creating regional co-ops, cooperatives. I believe that Vermont could its own dairy brand. That, I mean, we have the markets. We have Montreal, we have New York, we have Boston, we have Hartford, we have Albany. So it's just a matter of figuring out quota. I mean, we're overproducing, and So we need our family farms. It's the identity of our state, and I'm fully behind the dairy industry here.
Thank you. Senator Sanders?
Well, we made a tiny bit of progress in passing and getting the Margin Protection Program, the MPP, into Vermont, which brings about $6 million to dairy farmers who desperately need it. But I agree with Brad. At the end of the day, we have to address the crisis of milk price volatility. It goes up, farmers overproduce, and then prices go down and they're stuck with huge debt. And I believe for a very long time, that we need supply management. And I'm happy to say that I think within the dairy industry in the state of Vermont, more and more farmers at that.
Great. Mr. Svitavsky?
I also believe we need supply management. 2.5% in our state are farmers, and they need to be supported. And they're making a fraction of the profit that they made 10 years ago selling milk. And also the other issue is the wastewater. There needs to be one standard for the towns and for the farms. Farmers shouldn't lose their permit when for much greater abuse of our waterways, the towns dump wastewater. Needs to be one standard. Nobody's more concerned about the environment than our farmers. They need to be supported in every way possible.
You know, farming is the cornerstone of the life and lifestyle and lifeblood of Vermont. And the good news is that there's an amazing amount of new technology that is going to be helping them, and that is helping them. Precision fertilizing, robotic milking, artificial intelligence, all of these new ideas that we need to help our farmers to become educated about. You know, we have the great brand when it comes to food. It's not fully been utilized. The Vermont brand of artisan food needs to be promoted, and if it was promoted properly, it would help to reinforce the viability of our Vermont farms, and I think there's great opportunity there. So transitioning to a sustainable farming based on the new technologies available. Senator Sanders referred to the margin program in February 18. He voted against that program. I'm wrong?
If it was part of a larger bill, an appropriations bill,
Yeah.
then I may have voted against it, but it's
Okay.
something I strongly support and have advocated.
Generally, if you strongly support something, you vote for it.
Not if it's in a larger bill where there are other things you don't support.
Okay. So,
Thank you. I think that you've reached your time limit here, so
Thanks.
let's move along. Fola?
I think I do support our farmers. I've been to the farmers market where they have fresh produce, and the milk industry, they do need the latest technology so that they can keep on producing. And I also want to say one thing, beef is so cheap in Vermont. I guess it's coming from our farmers. I don't know how. Oh, when I came here about 35 years ago, I'm still able to pay the same price per pound in Vermont. So I really do support our farmers.
Russell?
Yes, so a lot of people come to Vermont, and they come here because, one, we have the best beer in the world, right? Number two, they come here for the schools, they come here for the scenic beauty of Vermont, and they come here for the food to a lesser extent. And what we need to do is support our farmers, because farm is just part of who we are. When you drive across the Connecticut River in Vermont, you just feel that sense of farming and of back to nature and all those good things. So I very much would support working with the farmers. They have some tough times ahead of them, obviously, and so we need to work hard to help them, but I think that's an important issue.
Bruce?
Yeah, I think we have to really look and see why we got in the predicament we're in, and question organic or non-organic. We need to market organic farming in Vermont, because that's what people think we are. Chemical farming, chemical fertilizing, folks, put 800 head of cattle on a few acres, man. All you have is mud. All right? We need to figure out how many acres per head and go back to that. Upstream. The farmers are going to have to do it, and they're going to have to come down, and we're going to have to help them. We're going to have to buy their products. End of story.
Coming from a traditional farming family, the Gilbert farm in Williamstown, Vermont, the Christmas tree farm, uncles, great aunts, uncles. I would definitely bring back the federal funding for farmers in order to bring back their markets locally, more farm to table for the restaurants here across all 14 counties. I would definitely give them the long-term, low-interest rate loans in order to upgrade their technology, produce more milk, and sell it here locally and reestablish the markets across all 14 counties of Vermont, rather than selling just to the big money conglomerates in the Midwest. I would love to bring Vermont back. There's several traditional industries that I feel could benefit from a realigning for the 21st century, and that is something I would definitely support. I know I enjoyed being on the farm. I enjoyed eating a lot of green apples, getting sick, making apple pie and maple syrup, and when I got older, some hard cider.
All right, thank you. We're very close to the end here. We've got time for just one more question. I'm going to skip the closing statements because I want to get to this very most important question in many people's minds. It's been the topic of care. But almost 10 years ago now, getting close, Congress passed the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. It was passed in 2009, 2010. Would you favor its repeal? Would you go further than it did, such as with the single-payer Medicare? I almost cut you off last time around, so why don't I give you the first shot at this, and then we'll just come back down the line this way. And you'll have 1 minute, and then that will be the end of the debate.
I really do believe in what Senator Sanders is trying to do on Medicare for all, but this is a subject or a topic that can take about 3 hours. So, but I'll be very brief.
You're welcome to stay after. Well, we can keep going, but I know Senator Sanders has to run.
You know, I am a licensed insurance agent. We try so hard with Obamacare. It wasn't perfect. Nonetheless, health insurance is a very, very complicated issue. That is why I don't believe we must tell people, I'm going to give you Medicare for all, because Medicare was actually prepaid, just like Social Security. As an accountant, I can do people's taxes. I have the TIN to file people's taxes, and the question I was raising up my hand for Senator Sanders, I don't know how he's going to, people that have already prepaid into the health insurance, the 65 and over, how is Senator Sanders
If you could wrap it up,
going
please.
to equalize or have an equilibrium to give everybody Medicare for all?
Thank you.
So I don't see it possible. It's
Go
going to
ahead.
take
I'm
time.
sorry. We're well beyond your time here. I apologize.
Yes.
I know we could spend a lot
Sorry.
more time on this question. I apologize for cutting it short. Go ahead, Russell.
Yes, healthcare for all is a very noble concept, but it also has to be fiscally responsible, I feel. So I think we need to move in steps in a number of different ways. And I've worked in the healthcare industry most of my life, so I'm pretty knowledgeable on the topic. First of all, I think we could pursue baseline healthcare. You know, baseline, you're sick, you see a doctor, that kind of thing. I think that's something that's achievable today. But we really need to tackle the root of the problem, and that's the cost. The cost is crazy for a ton of reasons. You know, number one, we could, for example, bring in more nurses and more physician's assistants to cover more baseline treatment in the doctor's office and thereby lower costs that way. Number two, liability laws. You know, a lot of companies, there's companies out there who threaten a $1 billion lawsuit and then sue for $100 million. Well, we're the ones who pay that cost. Number three, the FDA, I work with them a lot, and they're great people. They help our industry a lot, but they could be streamlined a lot as well. I've seen a number of instances where costs could be lowered substantially by working more thoroughly with the FDA. So, yes, done. Thank you very much.
Mr. Busa?
We need to differentiate between health care and sick care, folks. Health care is eating green. When you're not that, you go and you get into sick care. If you're healthy, you don't need the sick care, you're not going to. Now, in the Affordable Care Act, on page 107, there's a place in there for health care sharing. You don't have to go through. And you could get common people and share your expenses. there is another thing that we could do and allow insurance companies, new insurance companies amongst yourselves is to come up without interfering with you and telling you you can't do that. All right?
Great. Mr. Gilbert?
That's the bottom line.
Go ahead.
As a veteran, I shouldn't have to travel over 100 miles to go to White River Junction or to go up all the way to Newport because my primary physician is in that location. You've got one of the best medical facilities up here in UVM, one of the best research medical schools. You've got Dartmouth, which is also in the top 10, and yet we've got several hospitals in all 14 counties across the state of Vermont that don't have access to specific leading-edge medical technology because they are what? They're too small, they can't quite afford it. I would love to be the U.S. Senator in order to help bring many of the leading-edge treatments, seeing how my father just had his second knee replacement done, and we had a close call on that one, but he got the first 10-year warranty out of his first one, and let's see if we can make it last a little longer on this one. I'm all about bringing the funding to bring the leading edge treatments to all the facilities, and not just basically based on a population model.
Mr. Peacock?
So as far as I can answer the question, do I support Obamacare? Yes.
Do you support Obamacare? Would you repeal it? Would you go further than it did?
Right. I do support Obamacare. I actually ended up paying more for my health. However, I'm okay with that because it gave millions of Americans an opportunity to have health insurance. Now, do I agree with the individual mandate? I'm not so sure about that, but it was a way to fund it at that time. Do I support universal health care? Absolutely. I think it's essential. And I did read Our Revolution, and Senator Sanders actually put out a plan of how it could be implemented over time. So, reducing the age to 55 and things like that. But I'm not a spokesperson for you. So
Conveniently, he's next up. So go ahead, Senator Sanders.
I voted for the ACA. Many millions of people finally got health insurance who didn't have it. It also ended something which we're worried about right now. It ended the obscenity of insurance companies denying coverage to people who had pre-existing conditions. And that is obviously a step forward. But it did not go far enough. We are today, and everybody should know this when we argue about health care, that our dysfunctional system today enables us to spend twice as much per capita on health care as any other nation, twice as much as our friends in Canada. And yet we got 30 million people uninsured and even more who are underinsured, and we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Medicare is a good program. I would add benefits to it for seniors such as dental care and hearing aids, but it's a good, strong program. The American people, 70% of the American people said, let us expand Medicare to cover every man, woman, and child. That is the legislation I've introduced. Obviously, I strongly support that.
John?
I absolutely support Obamacare. It's the first national health insurance. It was an amazing accomplishment, especially when the opposing party unanimously opposed it and worked hard to derail it. It was absolutely excellent. Hillary Clinton put forth the idea of expanding the funding to community health centers, which are absolutely wonderful, provide excellent care in our own communities. We need to, with whatever, we can make the most wonderful proposals in the world. I could promise free tuition, I could promise free health care, I could promise the world. But unless it has a realistic chance of passing, unless it can be something that actually can go through and be accomplished, it's useless. So I would look to expand it. It used to be one of the GOP's favorite things to attack. Now it's supported by a good, healthy majority of people in our country. Forbes magazine said they had been dead wrong. Obamacare was an excellent initiative. I believe it is, and Yes, we could expand it, but we need to work with realistic proposals.
Thank you. Lawrence?
Do I understand there are going to be no closing statements?
That's correct. This is it.
Okay. Healthcare is a service. I want to see the best healthcare for everybody, better than what billionaires have today. How are we going to have that? We're going to have that by expanding the possibilities for people to choose. We're going to have it by breaking down the doors and barriers that limit me from going across a state line to buy my insurance and every other American. You know, a funny thing happens when you have expanded competition. The product quality and service goes up, innovation goes up, and the cost of it goes down. Health savings accounts, health savings accounts, cost of FDA approval has to be reduced. $2 billion to get a new drug approved is ridiculous. Tort reform and full cultivation of our biomedical breakthroughs. Within 2 years, every 73 days, we're going to double the amount of medical knowledge. The amazing possibilities with the genome for America is great, but it's not going to happen by heavy-handed government control. I wish I had time to tell you about the initiative I want to promote for international students to come here and fill all of the vacant schools here.
But I'm afraid that we don't. So I just want to thank everyone for being here, and I want to remind you before we all...
I was told we were going to have closing statements.
I know, and I apologize that I want to cram as many questions in as possible. I appreciate your flexibility here. I want to remind everybody that the election is 1 week from tomorrow. That's Tuesday, November 6th. It's not too late. We have same-day voting, same-day registration, that's right, here in Vermont, and so you're still able to vote even if you're not registered. You can call your town clerk. You can go down there and vote anytime you'd like. You can get in touch with the Secretary of State's office and your town clerk to have a ballot sent to you. I want to thank Channel 17 for hosting this, the O'Brien Center for hosting us here, and most of all, the candidates for taking part in this civil and spirited debate. I appreciate it. Let's give them all a round of applause. Thank you.
Can we do a 30-second?
No, I'm sorry. This is the end. But if people want to wait around afterward, we can talk amongst ourselves. Thank you very much. Have a good night.